Hello everybody and welcome back to the Fortress of Solitude. Today we're going to be talking about Action Comics issue 1082 by John Ridley, Inaki Miranda and Eva de la Cruz. The Superman Superstars initiative continues, this time with I Am Batman and other history of the DCU writer John Ridley regaling us with a story steeped in Superman lore. As one day in Metropolis, the city is rocked by the return of Major Disaster, former Green Lantern villain turned Superman villain. Disaster ends up robbing a bank, and in the process his powers trigger a massive earthquake across the city. Now I know Ridley is an acquired taste for some people, but I really like how he's able to bring a sense of quote-unquote normal to these books. We don't start straight out with the heroes in the action, we get to see the people of Metropolis just going about their day, going to work, getting haircuts, all the normal day stuff before the chaos just suddenly hits them like a ton of bricks. Ridley also remembers certain characters who should be a little bit more prominent in Superman-related books like Chief Krakoa, who along with the rest of MPD respond to the earthquake. It's only a very small sequence, but with this new character he is able to give them a sense of how smart Krakoa is, realizing that the scale of this earthquake means it's not natural and they need to head to the epicenter to find out who is responsible for it. Luckily, before his car is crushed by some debris, Superman arrives, but there is something different about the Man of Steel this time, as he doesn't stop to chat with Krakoa, who notices that the usually level-headed hero appears furious. Superman, angry at the destruction wrought on his city, gets even more enraged when he finds a dead man in the quake zone, and he confronts Major Disaster, who before Superman can land a punch, decides to give himself up to the hero and the arriving police. I really like the opening to this story. There's action, a bit of intrigue with why Disaster is doing this, since last time we saw him, Superman gave him a chance to be better and reform himself, and the villain took him up on that offer. So why is he broken bad again? And also, why is Superman so angry about Disaster's turn? What made him almost attack the villain in a fit of rage? It sets us up for a unique tangle of mysteries to uncover, and for Clark Kent too, as well, as later at Strikers, Clark goes to see Paul. Clark meets with Paul thanks to his lawyer asking for the reporter specifically so he can make a statement about what happened during the battle. Disaster is racked with guilt over what he did and reveals that the pressure of trying to do good and go straight was too much for him, and he wanted to rob a bank just to make some quick money, and the man's death was an accident, wanting Clark to tell the world that he is indeed guilty and he should be punished as such. I always like when a writer comes in and decides to build off a previous writer's story, in this case being Joe Kelly's 2001 Action Comics 783 issue, The Choice, which is where Superman offers Disaster, among a few other villains, the choice to turn good. It's a fantastic little one-off issue and I recommend people go and seek it out. Ridley is writing the end of that story more or less, or the continuation of that story, with Disaster deciding that he can't turn good, so therefore he should just not exist and he should be put to death because of his transgressions. Later, Clark talks with Lois about what happened and how he seriously wanted to hurt Major Disaster in the moment. Lois reminds him of when he convinced Major Disaster to change his ways, and how he himself was at his lowest point thanks to it just being after the Our Wars at War event, so Superman was a little bit disillusioned. There was also some other stuff happening. There was also some real world stuff happening, since all of this storyline started in just like the month and the months after 9/11 happened, so there was kind of this air of hopelessness for a lot of things, a lot of people as well in real life. Clark knows that helping out Disaster was a major event that restored his faith in his work as Superman. Ridley gets into Clark's mission of hope and how at times it feels like he's kind of wavering in it, and maybe it doesn't work all that well in a modern setting. His use of Lois as Clark's grounding rod is excellent, and it's great it doesn't fall into the same trope a lot of writers fall into when broaching the subject of Clark feeling like his mission is not worth it now, which is it doesn't get all mopey and depressing and just self-loathing and everything. He doesn't shut himself off and instead talks it out with Lois, who reminds him that the people are responsible for themselves. Superman isn't. Superman can't like lord over their lives. They are responsible for what they do to themselves. Their talk turns to the other villains that Superman has helped out, like Scorch and Atomic Skull, who also recently turned into a villain again, and Clark wonders why that happened, and why it's happened now to Major Disaster, and he kind of wants to go and find the truth, and he wants to go and interview some of these villains to find out exactly why they did this. The next day, Clark goes to see Chief Krakoa's press conference on the major disaster attack, and Krakoa reveals that Paul had recently become addicted to online gambling, and he was deeply in debt because of it, so it's why he robbed the bank, so he needed the cash to cover his debts. Krakoa's view on Superman also being changed because of this is really interesting as well, since during that fight he genuinely believed that Superman was going to kill Major Disaster. And this is kind of a cool little character development with Krakoa, since when we first met him he was a big Superman fan, he was happy to help the hero and doing what he does and everything, and he's been in the job now for a little bit and he's seen a lot of things, so maybe he's become a little bit jaded and he's now seen that Superman is even capable of kind of flying off the handle a little bit here. It's a cool little parallel to Clark's story where he too has seen people change for the better and for the worse. The difference being that from Krakoa, it's from a quote-unquote human POV, from a guy who can't really do anything to change who these heroes and villains are, and all he can really do, as what he says in this book, is arrest them when given the chance. It's a really neat aspect on now that while also helping Disaster, Superman has to kind of prove himself to Krakoa, who's a little bit more apprehensive about helping the hero. Clark then decides to go and interview Disaster's former team members, beginning with small-time crook Mighty Bruce, who tells Clark that Paul's alcoholism had a real grip on him and he didn't have the heart to follow through with his promise to go straight. Scorch also backs up what Bruce says, that while Paul helped her and Bruce lived honest lives, he couldn't take the weight of it himself and kind of spiraled. And I really like how Ridley here frames living with metahuman powers, and how for most people it's like the devil on your shoulder. It's like an addiction and you just can't ignore it and shut it off, as it often makes things like getting quick cash easier and more accessible, hence why so many metas turn to crime. Meta powers being an addiction is something I've never really considered, but Ridley laying it out here, it just really makes sense. Like, of course, if you can just blast into a bank, get some quick money, why not? Thanks to this addiction, Paul can't go straight since the powers just would not let him. It was just too easy for him to break bad. Because of this and what Scorch and Bruce has told Clark, he's left without the hope he was looking for. And on his walk home, he talks with Lois about the story and how Paul did try, but who he is as a meta prevented him from living a normal life. On top of that, the people Clark interviewed all feel that he was trying to write kind of a clickbaity article trying to blame society for what happened to Paul, something which frustrates Clark since he was trying to do the exact opposite. As Clark talks with Lois, a mugger with a baton tries to rob Clark, who comes across a little annoyed by it. Figuring he won't be hurt, he tries to stop the man, but suddenly the man's baton glows with an energy and strikes Clark, causing him to bleed before the mugger runs off after knocking Clark down. Now this feels a little disconnected from the main storyline, just like a random attack, but from the little bits of Paul's story we got about him owing money to someone, which causes him to have his slide back into villainy, maybe it's connected to that, like this mugger is related to that and trying to warn Clark off the story to, not reveal who his employer is or something like that. Alternatively, it could be someone who this is just a random attack and Clark is just a random victim of this assault. However, it doesn't explain why the baton has an energy that could maybe hurt someone like Superman, and why would they attack someone who was seemingly just a random reporter with a baton imbued with a special energy. It feels like maybe someone might know who Clark is, maybe they're just like trying to warn him off or something. It's really quite interesting, and it leaves us on like a little bit of a cliffhanger, like what has happened. The most interesting thing about this though is how Clark kind of reacts to it, and how he reacts kind of like, not really in anger, but like a frustration, like annoyance, like this robber, like how dare he try and attack this guy who was Superman. It's a continuation of the frustrated, angry Superman we saw at the start. Clark is feeling lost in his mission of hope, and we're seeing that come through more now than ever. It's such an interesting view on Clark and how he deals with, the Clark and Superman dynamic, and I can't wait to see what Ridley has in store for us in the next 2 issues. Action Comics issue 1082 was some damn fine character work from John Ridley, who wonderfully built off an early 2000s Joe Kelly storyline, exploring Clark's need to help his villains reform, how it's not easy for the world's metahumans to react to a normal life and sort of settle into a normal life, and how Superman feels morally responsible for a lot of these people's choices when he shouldn't. It's something he cannot control. I feel like it's going to be a little bit of a controversial issue since it's not, constant action and fighting, but more character work and people talking. But man, I love a story that challenges Superman's motives and explores them in ways seldom seen. I'm going to give this issue a 10 out of 10.